What's your good story? Story 1. Background. My dad is a bit of a drama king and has tons of stories like this one. He's Norwegian and spent his first year of college at the University of Windsor. There was some initial confusion on his part when it came to enrolling in courses, so he ended up not getting into any of the ones he needed for his major. He went to the registrar to complain about this and was promptly told that it was his own fault and basically, too bad. My dad, always a clever guy, decided to call CBC. CBC sent a reporter and a camera operator to his dorm, and they followed him around campus. It was a rainy day, and the story looked like this. A hopeful Norwegian student came all the way to Canada for college, but didn't get into any of the courses he needed. Here he is, sad and alone, standing in the rain on the campus of the University of Windsor. The next morning, my dad woke up and turned on the TV to see if his story had made the local news. They had told him it might not air. To his disappointment, the story wasn't featured, so he walked into the kitchen to make breakfast, leaving the TV on in the background. As the local news ended, the national news broadcast began. It turned out my dad was the top story across all of Canada that day. He was immediately contacted by the dean of the university, who apologized profusely and assured him he could now enroll in any courses he wanted. Story 2. On my first day of first grade, I was waiting for the bus with my mother. The street I lived on connected to a busy, steep main road. I watched a woman come speeding around a curve on a bicycle, going way too fast. She hit a pothole, flipped over the handlebars, and slammed into a car coming up the road. Traffic came to a halt, and my mom ran to help the woman. She took her shirt off and wrapped it around the woman's bleeding head. I stayed with her, while my mom ran back to our house to call 911. This was the early 90s, before cell phones were common. Looking back, I guess people were more trusting then, because no one thought twice about a 6-year-old staying with an unconscious, injured stranger in the middle of the road. The sad part? None of the people in the stopped cars did anything. They just stood around and watched. I truly believe that strange and traumatic moment shaped me into the overly cautious, anxious child I was, and later led me to pursue a career in nursing. I've never forgotten that woman, and I never found out what happened to her after the ambulance took her away. Story 3. I grew up in a town called Taupo, New Zealand, and just outside of town is a volcano called Mount Ruapehu. One day I was staring out the classroom window when I noticed a thick plume of ash rising into the sky. I told the teacher it had erupted, but since I was known as the class clown, she assumed I was just causing another distraction, until the quiet kid in class confirmed it. She told us to stay where we were and left the classroom to talk with the other teachers. But by the time she returned, the ash had already reached us. It was 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, and now it was as dark as night. She said that if our parents usually picked us up, we should wait in class. But if we lived nearby, we could go. My best friend lived just down the road, so we grabbed our stuff and left. I'll never forget stepping outside. Everything was covered in a thick layer of soot and ash, and it was incredibly dark. Crossing the road was terrifying. You couldn't even see headlights until the cars were right in front of you. Thankfully, we only had one street to cross, and the rest of the walk was through a gully that led straight to my backyard. The next morning, I woke up feeling colder than usual, but didn't think much of it. I just wanted to catch the morning episode of Captain Planet, so I ran to the TV. My mom walked in and said, "I thought you'd be outside playing with the others." I was confused until I looked out the window. It had snowed, for the first time ever at my house. Apparently, volcanic eruptions can cause something called a volcanic winter, which sometimes leads to snow. I had the longest driveway in the neighborhood, with a hill, a curve, and a drop into a cul-de-sac, so all the kids came to my house to slide down it. I don't think I've ever been that happy in my life. Story 4. Backstory. I was 15 and had completed driver's ed, but didn't have my license yet. We also had to take first aid marsh CPR classes at my high school. My mom and I were home on a Saturday while my dad was out at a riverboat casino. Mom and I had gotten into a fight, so I was upstairs pouting like a typical teenager. I was napping when I suddenly heard her screaming my name. It wasn't an angry scream. It was a terrified scream, which immediately scared me. I ran downstairs to find blood everywhere, on the floor, in the dining room, and all over the kitchen. Puddles of it. The blood was coming from my mom's ankle. A vein had ruptured, and she hadn't even realized she was bleeding out while sitting at the kitchen table. Because of my first aid training, I knew I had to get a tourniquet on her ankle to stop the bleeding. We lived 20 minutes from the nearest hospital, and I didn't even think to call 911. I loaded her into the back seat, propped her leg up, wrapped it tightly in towels, and drove like crazy to get her there. I kept her talking, but as we got close to the ER, her speech became slurred and her eyes started rolling back in her head. The ER staff rushed out, took her from the vehicle, and immediately started working on her. The doctor later told me that if I had been even a little later, she would have died. She lost nearly half of her blood. While in the hospital, she was also diagnosed with diabetes, which helped save her life in the long run. As a side note, while the ER team worked on her, I had my grandmother repeatedly call our house phone. This was the early 90s, no cell phones, to try to reach my dad. I was terrified he might come home, see all the blood and footprints everywhere, and have a heart attack from the shock. Story 5. I'd say that my best story comes from my ridiculous misfortune with the movie Mission Impossible. Ghost Protocol? Now, hear me out. The first time I tried to watch this movie, I went to the theater with my girlfriend at the time. I was in 10th grade, and we'd been dating for about 5 or 6 months. I kid you not, just as the previews ended, she leaned over and said, "Look, I don't think this is going to work out." She broke up with me right there in the theater. We just left without even starting the movie. The second time, I went back to the theater with some friends. They wanted to cheer me up after the breakup. This time, we actually made it through the previews, and the movie started. About 30 minutes in, the fire alarm went off. Everyone looked around confused and slowly exited through the emergency doors. Someone had pulled the alarm as a prank, and the entire theater ended up crowded around the box office asking for refunds. The refund line was insanely long, so we just gave up and left. The third and final time I tried to watch that cursed film was nearly a year later at a close friend's house. His mom had cooked spaghetti for dinner, and the plan was to watch MI4 while we ate. I remember saying, "Man, I've had bad luck with this movie." Right before things went downhill again, his stepdad started choking, really choking, on the spaghetti. We had to call an ambulance, and he was taken to the hospital. My friend and I stayed behind after the paramedics assured us his stepdad would be okay. And once again, I didn't get to finish the movie. At this point, I've officially decided it's probably for the best if I just never try watching Ghost Protocol again. Story 6. During a time in my life when I was post-divorce, deep in debt, and living paycheck to paycheck on an impossibly tight budget, I turned in all my airline miles for a free solo trip to Vegas. I had astigmatism and couldn't afford corrective lenses, so I went to the optical shop for a free pair of sample contacts so I could see the Strip in all its majesty. On my first day there, I put in the lenses and accidentally scratched my right eye. Overnight, it became painfully infected. I went to a clinic and was diagnosed with a severe corneal ulcer that threatened to permanently blind that eye. I was given antibiotics, but I needed to return several more times because the injury was so serious. I had no insurance and no way to pay for the treatment. The doctors were amazing, so I wasn't afraid of losing my eye, but the medical bills on top of everything else would have been devastating. I went to the Treasure Island Casino gift shop and bought a toy eye patch to cover the injury. Skull and crossbones, of course. Then I took the $20 I had in my pocket and went to work. I'm not a gambler, but I knew the video blackjack machines had the best odds. I built up small wins, only to lose them again, leaving me with just $5. I went for a walk to clear my head, came back, and lost that $5 too. I went to my bank's website, borrowed a $20 cash advance, and took it out at the ATM. I tried one more time. This time, things came together. I managed to turn that $20 into just over $500, enough to cover my medical bills. I stopped right there, not wanting to push my luck. That toy eye patch now hangs on my refrigerator next to a magnet from the ophthalmologist's office. It's a reminder of the time I gambled for mercy and won. Story 7. I transferred groups within my company, and it was my first day with the new team. I arrived at my office and my new bosses were outside smoking. I chatted with them for a bit, then went up to the 9th floor to settle into my new workspace. My desk faced away from the window. I sat down at my computer and turned it on. Seconds later, there was a massive explosion behind me. The whole building shook. I ran to the window and saw debris floating through the air and birds flying in frantic patterns. My first thought was a car bomb, but I couldn't see anything on the ground. Then I crouched by the window and looked up. I saw a huge gaping hole in World Trade Center 1. I was maybe 150 yards away at 222 Broadway, right across from St. Paul's Church, with a clear view. I stared at the impact site until the second explosion, the second plane, snapped me out of it. That's when everyone realized it wasn't a random accident. I tried making phone calls, but all the lines were down. It was election day in NYC, and my grandma was working at one of the polling stations. My parents were on vacation in France. I finally reached a friend's dad and asked him to let people know I was okay. I went back to the window and saw people jumping. That was, without question, the worst part for me. Later, I managed to reach my friend. I was on the phone with her when one of the towers began to collapse. I yelled, "They're falling!" into the phone, threw it down, and ran toward the stairwell. The last thing I heard was, "What's falling?" from the receiver. I made it down into a sub-basement with a few others. Some people were in server rooms, others had left the building. After a couple of hours, the building's AC system was overwhelmed, and the room started filling with smoke and dust. I found some water, soaked my shirt, wrapped it around my face, and got out of there. I walked northeast past City Hall Park toward the bridges. The Brooklyn Bridge was covered in smoke, so I joined a large crowd heading to the Manhattan Bridge. In the middle of it, a couple of military planes flew low overhead, and everyone hit the ground. That moment was pure terror. Once in Brooklyn, people were handing out water. One side of Flatbush Avenue had a church, the other had a synagogue. It was a very New York moment. I went into a school and used the phone to let someone know I was alive. It took another 2 hours of walking before I finally made it home. That evening, I got together with my friends. We tried to drink and numb ourselves, but it didn't work. Nobody felt anything. It was too overwhelming. I was able to reach my parents the next morning. They couldn't get through to New York for almost 24 hours because the lines were overloaded. You could smell the smoke for months, especially in the subways. It was awful. Story 8. I was part of a robotics team during my senior year of high school. We ended up winning a regional competition in California and advanced to the national event in St. Louis, Missouri. 2 friends and I shared a hotel room, and we basically just hung out all night playing video games. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I decided I wasn't ready to call it a night, even though we had a competition in the morning, and wanted to walk around the streets of St. Louis. When I opened the door, I heard something rip. Our clever chaperones had used the old tape on the door trick to catch anyone sneaking out at night. Now I was pretty straight edge in high school. I didn't get into smoking or drinking until after graduation and never got in trouble at school. But hearing that tape rip sent my mind racing. I started panicking about being kicked off the team or getting suspended. I woke one of my friends up to ask what to do, and he just brushed it off and went back to sleep. In my worried state, I decided to remove the tape from every door on that floor. About halfway through, I started thinking, wait, do we really have this many people on our team? I had a huge wad of tape in my hand after a while, and it took some time since I was trying not to wake anyone. Basically, hugging the walls and sneaking around like a video game character. Once I was done, I tossed the wad into a planter and headed down to the lobby. I was too tired to go outside, so I just sat near a grand piano. By morning, everyone was wondering who had snuck out, and I kept a straight face. During breakfast, I overheard someone talking about the missing tape. It turned out there was another team, an all-girls team, on the same floor, and they had already been in trouble for having a guy in their room. They were now being blamed for the missing tape. In the end, I came clean so they wouldn't get into serious trouble. The lobby guy even vouched for me, saying I had been sitting downstairs playing around on the grand piano. Anyway, that's the one story I still tell every now and then. Story 9. One time I was flying from Long Beach, California to Dulles near Washington, D.C. While waiting at the gate, I noticed a girl from my school. I was a freshman in high school at the time. And like most freshmen, I had a crush on pretty much every girl I saw. But I had a particular crush on this girl, Annie. She was a sweet, bubbly theater kid, one of the nicest people I had ever met. I wasn't the type to be afraid of talking to girls, so I walked over and chatted with her while we waited to board. On the actual flight, she was seated all the way in the back, and I was right over the wing, so I didn't see her during the flight. For context, I'm terrified of flying. I need to see the horizon and the ground from the window, otherwise I panic. I always take a window seat and grip the armrest so hard you'd think I was trying to steer the plane myself. If we're flying through clouds or over the ocean at night, I shut down completely with anxiety. So there I was, gripping the armrests and staring out the window, trying not to panic. This flight was especially rough. Nighttime, lots of clouds, and the person across the aisle had closed their window, so I couldn't see anything if the plane turned left. It was basically a nightmare. Then the unthinkable happened. I had to go to the bathroom. I have actual nightmares about airplane bathrooms. No windows, tight space, and pure stress. Modern planes have something called an airborne collision avoidance system, which uses radar to detect nearby aircraft. If it senses danger, the plane will automatically dive. So guess when that system malfunctioned? While I was in the bathroom. The plane suddenly nosedived and people screamed. I was one of them. I panicked and tried to zip up too quickly, which caused a sharp burst of pain. Yeah, that was all me. By the time I got back to my seat, the pilot had stabilized the plane, and the PA system was explaining what had happened. I quietly sat down while everyone was distracted. A few days later, I ran into Annie again, and we talked about the flight. She said, yeah, some guy was screaming in the bathroom. It kind of creeped me out. She'll never know it was me. Story 10. I was in middle school in the early 1990s, around the time Sam's Clubs and similar warehouse stores started opening up. None of us could drive yet. Obviously, we were around 14, and few of our parents had club memberships, so it was rare for anyone to go there and buy stuff. And we didn't have jobs or income either, so we were usually working with $5 in allowance money here and there. One kid had a great idea and bought one of those huge bags of blow pops for $5. Let's say he ended up with about 100 blow pops, so 5 cents each. He brought them to school and sold them for a quarter apiece. He was sold out within a few days. He kept doing it for maybe 3 weeks before others caught on and started getting into the game. There were arguments about whether the new sellers had to offer different candy or if blow pops were fair game. The first wave of sellers decided everyone needed their own type of candy, forming a sort of mini cartel. Pretty funny looking back. About a month later, a new kid joined in, but he came in strong. He had everything. Must have spent $50, maybe $100. But he quickly ran into a problem. The school began cracking down on student-run candy sales in the cafeteria, which was where most of the money was made. Selling during lunch became risky. Most of the kids stopped while they were ahead and cashed out. But this one kid had way too much candy to just stop. There were only 4 classes after lunch, and the first 2 weren't good times to sell. That left maybe 5 or 6 good opportunities throughout the day. The issue was that, by that point in the school year, most students were grouped by level, so you typically had the same classmates all day. Exceptions like gym or band weren't good for selling either. But homeroom, which fell between second and third period, had a mixed group of students. That meant you saw kids you wouldn't normally run into, and more importantly, they saw you. The kid with the massive candy stash started repackaging it into Ziploc bags with 5 pieces each and sold those for $1. That went on for a few days until one of the kids in his homeroom asked to buy a bag and explained that he was reselling the candy for 25 cents a piece. He was essentially making a free piece of candy each day. There were a few kids in his next class who wanted to do the same. He offered $4 for 5 bags so he could make a profit off his friends. The original candy kid agreed. By the end of the week, he had sold out and used the profits to buy another $50 worth of candy for the next round. Word spread fast. A few more kids in the homeroom caught on and wanted to join in. Soon the candy kid was selling bundles of 5 bags to 5 or 10 kids in his homeroom. Each of them was making $1 a day just by acting as middlemen. It was an easy sell. They'd tell their friends how they sold out quickly and show off the wad of singles they'd made. It worked for 2, maybe 3 days. Then the market got saturated. The entire grade was flooded with candy sellers. The candy wasn't scarce anymore. The supply wasn't controlled by one person or a cartel. It became a commodity. Prices crashed to about 10 cents per piece, and the MLM-style distribution system couldn't sustain the collapse. The whole supply dried up within days, and with teachers cracking down harder, no one tried to restart the candy trade for months. Story 11. Our elementary school used to host something called the bike rodeo every year. All the kids would bring their bikes, helmets, and elbow pads for a full day of riding obstacle courses, taking strolls around the playground, and competing in fun events. The bike rodeo was seriously amazing. I would get excited every single year. I'd tell all my friends how I'd easily win first place in every event. My balance was superb, and my recess trash talk was even better. There was only one problem. I didn't know how to ride a bike. I didn't learn until the summer after 6th grade. So from 2nd to 5th grade, I'd always forget my bike. That meant I had to do the obstacle courses on foot. Things like walk backwards as slow as you can, or touch all 4 corners. Then you're done. It was pretty humiliating, but I loved the positive energy of the bike rodeo. There were no clowns at the bike rodeo. The final event was a relay race where you'd ride about 30 feet, sit on a balloon until it popped, then ride back to the next person. It was easy to avoid because only about 5 kids were selected to participate, and everyone wanted to join. But in 5th grade, everyone decided that since I was so good at biking, I should finally be part of the relay. I tried to back out, but it was too late. After years of bragging about how smooth I was on a bike, I said, "Let me be the anchor. Save the best for last. If it's close, I got it." But the race wasn't close at all. We were bigger, stronger, and faster. We had a solid lead when it was my turn to take it home. I jumped on the bike and tried to mimic what everyone else had done. I pedaled once and fell straight to the right. Okay, maybe just a little mistake. Everyone was still cheering. I hopped back on, took half a pedal, and fell straight to the left. Uh-oh. I had dragged my self-esteem 5 feet, with 25 more to go before I'd have to sit on a balloon and try not to cry. I peeked over and saw the 4th graders catching up fast. Not good. I continued to fall, about 9 times. Slowly, the cheering stopped. I could only imagine what people were saying. Is it the bike's fault? Is the chain off? Does he not actually know how to ride? Didn't he say he could do backflips? I popped the balloon on the first try, but by then I was dazed. A 3rd grader was already on their way back, and it became a dead race between me and a 2nd grader. I gave it one last go, hoping that seeing all my friends would inspire the magic I needed. But I fell again. Teachers started walking out and clapping for me. I stood up and sprinted to the finish. It felt like I was a boxer who needed the towel thrown in. I was Apollo Creed, and the bike was that big Russian fighter. I finally learned how to ride the next year, but it was too late to redeem myself at the rodeo. Sometimes I think about organizing another bike rodeo, just to prove myself once and for all. Story 12. I was on a business trip in Spokane, Washington a few years back and was taking a shower around 9 a.m. I suddenly got the eerie feeling that I wasn't alone in the bathroom. I yanked the shower curtain back, and there was the maid standing there. She mumbled something I heard as, "Sorry, so sorry," and hurried out of the room. I ran to the door completely naked, leaned out into the hallway, and yelled like a maniac as she rushed away. I shouted things like, "What is wrong with you? And are you deaf?" among other less than polite phrases. When I went back into the room, I realized she had been there for a while. My bed was stripped, and the trash had already been gathered. I calmed down, got dressed, and decided to find her and apologize for being such a jerk. I found her a few doors down, cleaning another room. I walked in and started apologizing, but before I could say much, she began signing to me. That's when it hit me. She was deaf. She truly hadn't heard me in the shower. I felt horrible. I offered her a $50 tip, but she initially refused. I insisted, and she finally accepted. For the rest of my stay, I made an effort to be the best hotel guest possible. I cleaned up after myself, took out my own trash, and kept everything tidy. To this day, I still do those things, and I never stay in a hotel without thinking about that moment. Story 13. I was at a volleyball camp sometime back in high school. It was held at the Islamic Academy Senior High. Don't ask me why. I don't even know. Anyway, about halfway through the day, I had to use the washroom. I really had to pee, so I excused myself and went looking for a bathroom. Eventually, I found one, and upon entering, I noticed there were no urinals. That struck me as odd. Every school bathroom I'd been in had urinals. I checked to make sure I wasn't in the girls' bathroom. Nope, it was the guys'. Then I noticed this little passageway tucked behind the stalls. In that room, there was a trough. I figured, okay, maybe this isn't the fanciest school, but it works. So I finished my business and returned to the group. The coach asked what had taken me so long, and I told him about the hidden urinal. "Please don't tell me you peed in that." "I peed in that." God damn it. Turns out it was a foot washing basin. A ceremonial foot washing basin. I guess that explains why it didn't flush and why there was a tap over it. I just thought it was a budget setup. For the rest of the week, I was that guy. Story 14. I was kidnapped 5 years ago. I was released unharmed after one night. The men are now in prison. The first 20 minutes in the car with them, I was sure I was going to die. I was convinced they intended to assault me, and I knew with every part of me that I wasn't going to let that happen. They had a gun and a meat cleaver, so I figured they'd have to kill me when I fought back. I prepared myself for it. After 20 minutes, they let me sit up. They'd made me keep my head down so I couldn't see where we were going. And then, strangely, they started being nice to me. They let me pee in someone's yard, bought me a soda at a gas station, and showed me YouTube videos on a phone they'd stolen. They bought drugs and offered me some. I declined. One of them asked for my number, saying he wanted to take me out sometime to make up for taking me. They even mocked my boyfriend for letting them take me. They had broken into his apartment and taken me after robbing us. Eventually, in the morning, they drove me to the address I gave them as my home. It was actually an old apartment I used to live in, and they let me go. I knew after the first 20 minutes that I was going to survive. Talking to them, I realized they weren't evil. They were just stupid, reckless addicts who let a robbery spiral out of control. People assume it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and they're partially right, but the experience itself wasn't the worst part. I figured out pretty quickly how to manipulate the men who took me. The worst part was the next day, when I had to call my parents. I calmly began explaining what had happened. My father, very stoic, military-like, a man I'd never seen cry, not even at his mother's funeral, cut me off and, in a completely flat voice, asked, "Did they assault you?" They didn't. But hearing my father have to ask his only daughter that question, that was the worst moment of my life. A father should never have to say those words. By the way, kids, don't ever touch hard drugs. Story 15. When I was 18, I watched my father die on a stranger's driveway while I gave him CPR. He had a heart attack while out walking with my mom. She ran into a nearby house to call 911 and to call me. I was an EMT off duty at the time and showed up at the same time as emergency services. When I got there, I immediately began chest compressions while a firefighter used an ambu bag to give him air. I remember every second of it vividly. I've written the story out many times, hoping it would help get it out of my head. For 2 years, I had terrible nightmares. I couldn't stop seeing my dad's vomit-covered, lifeless face. After a few minutes of CPR, the defibrillator arrived. They shocked him once. His heart regained a normal rhythm briefly, then flatlined again. We put him in the ambulance and rushed him to the hospital. He was declared DOA. I remember my mother trying to hold back tears, asking if everything was going to be okay. I was 18 and didn't know what to say, so I said, "Nobody's dead until a doctor says they're dead." She told me to go home and start calling our family. When I got home, I cried until I couldn't anymore. Then I started preparing to make the calls. To my grandmother, to my dad's sister and brother, to my siblings, and to my mom's mom. Before I could do it, my mom called from the hospital. The doctors had officially declared him gone. I had to be the one to tell my grandmother her son was dead. I had to tell his siblings and my own. It was awful. I hate thinking about it, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Even writing this now, I feel numb. It brings back flashes of images I wish I could erase forever. The anniversary is May 9th. It will be 22 years. Story 16. My senior year of high school, I was a technology assistant, which basically meant I did nothing during that class period. My 2 best friends were also teacher's aides during the same period, so we'd always hang out in the chemistry lab together. We used that time to mess around, often pulling pranks on another friend's car. We'd do stuff like pour water on it when it was freezing outside so that his would be the only car iced over in the lot. One day, a teacher asked us to make some copies of tests. We went to the copy room and completed the task. While we were there, we started goofing off with the copier. It started off casual, but things escalated quickly. My friends were both great artists. One of them drew a crude sketch of male anatomy and slapped it on the copier. Naturally, we laughed like any group of high school guys would. Then we decided to make several copies and tape them all over our friend's car. One of the guys, the one who hadn't drawn the first sketch, was a strict Christian. No cursing, no drinking, no inappropriate behavior. We eventually convinced him to draw one too. Now, my first friend was already a great artist, but what the second one produced was on another level. It was disturbingly accurate. Let's just say he knew the details better than most people would ever admit to. It was almost impressive. We made a copy of his drawing, cut it out, and planned to drape it from the top of our friend's windshield. It was a solid 9-incher. Before we could leave the room, another teacher walked in to use the copier. Immediate panic. He stood at the machine and glanced at the trash can. It was painfully obvious what was in there. He picked up the paper, held it up, and simply said, "Boys, that was it." We braced ourselves for trouble, but he just placed the paper back in the trash, made his copies, and left. His office was right outside the copy room. We sat in silence for a moment until we heard a faint chuckle coming from his office. Needless to say, we were thrilled and completed our mission. One of my favorite memories from high school. Story 17. Several years ago during med school, it was finals week, which meant I was severely sleep deprived. After finishing my last test, I faced the dreaded drive home, struggling to stay awake. I lived over 20 miles from LA County Hospital, so it was all freeway. To avoid falling asleep behind the wheel, I tried everything. Blasting loud music, rolling the windows down, slapping myself in the face. None of it really worked. Then I got smacked in the head by what felt like divine intervention. I was doing about 40 miles per hour, which is considered fast in LA traffic, when I started dozing off. Suddenly, something hit me hard in the head. For a moment, I was sure I'd been shot in one of the random drive-by shootings that were sadly common in the early 1990s. My head jerked to the side and I swerved the car, doing my best to stay conscious and keep control. I managed to get back into my lane and take a breath. I checked myself, expecting to find blood or worse, but instead I saw a pigeon flapping its wings in my back seat. The bird had flown through my open window, smacked me in the head, somehow survived, and then flew back out the window. A pigeon on the Ventura Highway. At 40 miles per hour, I genuinely thought I was losing my mind. I stayed wide awake for the rest of the drive home, shaken and amazed. Even the drivers around me seemed stunned. No one would look directly at me. When I got home, I wondered how I was going to convince my wife that I hadn't made the whole thing up. Thankfully, sitting in the back seat was one large pigeon feather, proof that I hadn't imagined it. Story 18. This was back in 5th grade, which would have been 2003. I was 11 years old, and by that point, I had developed some empathy and a filter for what I should or shouldn't say in front of others. I also hung out with the girls at my school more than the guys, not because I was a flirt or anything. I've just always had a more feminine side. I'm not gay, just more compassionate and caring, more motherly in my ways, I guess. One day I went over to a friend's house. Let's call her Catalina. Now I should explain a bit about her. Kat grew up without a father, and her mom worked every day from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., so she spent a lot of time alone. I used to play with her so she wouldn't feel so alone. That night, like many Saturdays, her mom was asleep, probably from exhaustion. Around midnight, Kat got tired and went to get her pajamas on and head to bed, motioning for me to come upstairs with her. Okay, maybe you're thinking something will happen, but it didn't. What happened was something sad. Once we got to her room, she started quietly crying and sniffling. Being the empathetic person I am, I asked her what was wrong. She told me that no one had ever cared about her bedtime. People just pointed to her room and said a quick good night. I thought that was incredibly sad and asked what I could do to help. She asked me to sing her a lullaby. That made me feel even worse. Now, a lot of people might think singing a lullaby to an 11-year-old girl you go to school with is weird. And yeah, maybe it was. But I didn't care. I just felt bad for her. So I sang her a lullaby while she fell asleep, holding back tears of my own the whole time. After I was sure she was asleep, I wrote her a note. It basically said I was sorry she felt that way and that if she ever needed anything, she could call me. Then I left. I wasn't going to stay the night, especially since I was pretty sure her mom wouldn't even remember inviting me over. She always seemed drunk and stressed, and I didn't want to be around if things went sideways. Story 19. My mother attended a community event hosted by a local congresswoman. She was one of the first to arrive and signed in at the table, where she would later meet the congresswoman. Since she was early, she decided to walk across the street to a grocery store to grab some breakfast. When she came back outside, the line had wrapped around the corner. It was a beautiful day, so she moved to the back of the line to wait. At 10:10 a.m. on January 8, 2011, a shooter emerged and shot the congresswoman in the head. 6 people were killed and 13 others injured. Most of the victims were near the front of the line, exactly where my mother should have been. The very last person to be shot 3 times before the shooter reloaded was standing directly in front of my mom. The shooter was tackled to the ground right next to her. My mother helped pin him down and even took away his remaining ammo. For many sleepless nights after that, I kept wondering, did he aim at my mom and just run out of bullets? What if he had one more? What if she had stayed in her original spot at the front of the line? My family was incredibly fortunate that day, but so many others weren't. When something like that happens, you question everything. Is this really reality? How does something like that happen? And if your loved one dies, you're left to face a pain that's beyond words. But even when your loved one survives, the trauma lingers. I had nightmares for months, dreaming that my mom wasn't so lucky, that she didn't make it. It's like winning a dark lottery, and it still haunts me. Story 20. My grandmother was driving. I was attending community college, so I still lived at home, and she worked at the college as well, so she gave me rides. It was 9 a.m., and I was half asleep as we drove in the middle lane of a 3-lane, one-way road. Suddenly, I heard my grandmother say something like, "What do we have here?" I sat up and looked out the windshield to see a man, likely drunk, stumbling down the road directly in our lane. We stopped the car so we wouldn't hit him. As he got closer, I thought he might just run into the vehicle. He didn't seem to notice we were even there, but he did notice. Once he reached the front of the car, he put one foot on the bumper, placed his hands on the hood, and climbed up. As he tried to take another step, he slipped and slammed his face into the windshield. I'll never forget the image of his grimy, sweaty face smearing across the glass. His head slid off the side and hit the mirror. Unfazed, he stood back up, planted a foot on the windshield, right in front of my horrified grandmother, and tried to crawl over the car. He only got one foot up before slipping and rolling onto the roof. The metal buckled under his weight. Somehow, he managed to stand back up, walked across the top of the car, stepped on the back window, then the trunk, and finally hopped off and stumbled away. My grandmother pulled into a nearby parking lot and called the police. I had never seen her that shaken. After she made the call, a heavy-set man approached and knocked on our window. She was terrified and refused to open it, which I completely understood. Eventually, she cracked the window just enough to hear him. He explained that the man who had climbed over our car was his friend and that they had just finished breakfast. My grandmother wasn't having it. The police showed up, took our statements, and sent out another unit to look for the man. As the officer finished taking our information, the second squad car pulled up with someone in the back seat. The officer asked my grandmother if it was the man who had climbed on the car. I looked through the window and saw him trying to kick the glass out. She confirmed it was him, and they took him away. We were pretty sure he was on something, likely more than just alcohol. I don't know exactly what happened to him afterward, but it took forever to fix the car. Something must have broken internally because after that, the roof leaked every time it rained. It took nearly a year before everything was finally back to normal. Story 21. My grandpa on my mom's side was a real character. He was from a medium-sized town, but he was the kind of guy who knew everyone. Running errands with him would take 4 times longer than it should have because everyone wanted to stop and talk to him, and he wanted to stop and talk to everyone. When I hit my growth spurt, I ended up being about the same size as him, so he always joked, "When you outgrow your clothes, let me have them so I can look like one of the cool kids." It never failed. Every time, "Hey, nice shorts. Let me know when you get tired of them. I want to be cool and hip." A few years ago, my grandpa had a stroke late on a Friday evening. I got a call from my mom on Saturday morning letting me know, and she said she'd call back once they had more information. I was at bid day for my fraternity, getting ready to go to a football game with all the new pledges, when I got the call that I should come home because it wouldn't be long. I made it back in time to see him at the hospital and talk to him before he went into a coma. He couldn't speak, but he was able to squeeze my hand and let me know he understood what I was saying as I told him how much I loved him and what I would do to make him proud. I stayed for a while on Saturday, but when he slipped into a coma, my parents and grandma told me to go back to school since it was uncertain how long he'd stay in that condition. Monday morning, I got the call that he had passed away. Honestly, I was thankful it wasn't a long, drawn-out process. My grandmother nearly passed away not long after. She broke her hip and refused to eat because that would mean letting go of his hand. Fast forward to Tuesday morning. I took the week off from classes because I couldn't focus. I slept in a little and planned to pack my bags for the funeral. When I had visited home on Saturday, I brought my suit so my parents could take it to the dry cleaners along with everything else, including the suit my grandpa was supposed to wear in his casket. I got a frantic call from my mom early Tuesday morning. She was in hysterics. I thought something had happened to my grandma. Instead, I heard, "Go to Dillard's. Get a new suit. Save the receipt." Confused, I asked what was going on, and she passed the phone to my dad. Turns out there was a mix-up at the dry cleaners. When they brought my grandpa to the funeral home to be prepared, the dry cleaners had sent the wrong suit. They sent my suit so my grandpa, who always joked about wearing my clothes so he could be cool and hip, was now actually wearing my suit. They couldn't take it off him because it had to be cut up to be put on him. So my grandpa, who always joked about taking all my hand-me-downs, was buried in my suit. And every time I wear the new suit I bought that week, I can't help but laugh, because if I could talk to him now, I know the first thing he'd do is laugh and say, "I told you I was going to get your clothes." Story 22. Back when I was a kid, my dad was in the Army. We were living in Germany at the time. He was working at a different base for the week. When Friday night came, he had the option of taking a helicopter back to our home base and getting there at a decent hour, or taking a van, which would get him home in the middle of the night. He had some work he needed to finish up, so he chose the van. That helicopter ended up having a mechanical failure, crashed, and everyone aboard was killed. This was before cell phones, early 90s, so information moved slowly. From all accounts, my dad was supposed to be on that helicopter. We got a call late that night informing us of the crash, but they couldn't confirm whether he was on it. We were all in shock, crying, panicking, not knowing. Later that night, my dad got home. We were all gathered in the living room, either awake or pretending to sleep. He hadn't heard about the crash and was confused about why we were all still up. I still remember the feeling when he walked through the door and we realized he was safe. That was an incredible moment. Story 23. A while ago, I was feeling extra bold and wanted to push the envelope a little. A friend had gotten me into urban exploration, and we started checking out abandoned sites and restricted areas. After doing some research, I discovered that it was possible to access the water drainage system under my town. It was wide enough to support a stream that naturally flowed beneath the main commercial area. I found an area that had recently been constructed and decided to jump into the stream where it entered the tunnel. The tunnel got larger and eventually opened into a massive cavity beneath the heart of town. Feeling great about the discovery, I kept exploring until my flashlight batteries died. Let me clarify. This was around 1 a.m., and I was at the farthest point from the entrance. A 20-minute walk or crawl back through a foot of freezing cold running water. This was February. I ended up having to feel my way out the same way I came in, completely in the dark. It was definitely more of an experience than I had bargained for. On the bright side, I found $1 that had washed up in there. So that's something. Story 24. I was in my front yard in a heavily populated suburban neighborhood when I suddenly heard someone yelling, "It's gonna get Riley! It's gonna get Riley!" I looked around and saw a bunny rounding the corner of the house across the street. Right behind the bunny came a dog. Right behind the dog came a kid, probably about 16 years old. The dog was gaining on the bunny, and the kid was gaining on the dog. Just as all three converged, a falcon, yes, a falcon, swooped down into the chaos. I dropped my laundry basket and ran over. When I got to the scene, I did a quick visual assessment. The kid was lying on his stomach, holding the rabbit. The dog was trying to nip at the rabbit, and the falcon was either going for the dog or the rabbit. It was hard to tell. My brain instantly decided the falcon was the biggest threat. So I thought, I need to kick this falcon in the head to stop the madness. But for some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So instead, I grabbed it by the throat. Nobody ever believes this part. Picked it up and slammed it on the ground about 5 feet away. Surprisingly, it stayed down. I looked around again. The kid was wearing camo and had successfully secured the rabbit. The dog had calmed down. And then I noticed the falcon was wearing leather. That's when it all clicked. The kid was a falconer. He had been hunting rabbits with his trained bird. And I had just slammed his probably very expensive falcon into the dirt. Nearly kicked it in the head, too. Wait, what? Is that bird yours? Yeah. Oh, man, I'm so sorry. It's okay. And just like that, he left with his dead rabbit, his dog, and his falcon. It was a strange day. To this day, I still don't know which one of them was Riley. Story 25. This goes back to when I was 7 years old living in Omaha, Nebraska. Omaha is my birthplace and has about as much going on as a fallen tree trunk. Nebraska isn't a very populated state, to the point that when it's one semi-respected, but not particularly great, college football team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, play at the stadium in the capital, that stadium temporarily becomes the third largest city in the state. The one thing Omaha does have going for it is its zoo. The Henry Dorley Zoo is a world-class facility with incredible exhibits and impressive breeding programs. When I was 7, they introduced their newest feature, a brand new orangutan enclosure. I begged and pleaded for my grandpa to take me, and finally he did. I was beyond excited. The exhibit was toward the back of the zoo, so we looked at everything else first. But the whole time, all I could think about was the orangutans. Finally, the moment came. We walked into the viewing area, which had a large glass wall shaped like a bell curve, dividing the room in half. On one side were the visitors, and on the other, the orangutans. I ran up to the front, not noticing the horror on the faces of the people around me, and looked into the enclosure, where I saw the biggest, roundest, most intense-looking orangutan my young eyes had ever seen, and still have ever seen to this day. In front of it, kneeling, was another orangutan. My 7-year-old brain couldn't quite understand what was happening as it bobbed its head back and forth in front of the other's lower half. Now, as an adult, I understand it was explicit. At the time, all I could comprehend was that the smaller orangutan was clearly being dominated. The big one stared out at the stunned crowd with the presence of a ruler surveying his kingdom. And then he locked eyes with me. And while I don't speak orangutan, the look in his eyes clearly said, "You're next." A few years and many nightmares later, my family visited the National Zoo in Baltimore. Everyone wanted to see the orangutans again, and they didn't understand my loud protests. Eventually, I gave in. The enclosure was long, with bars hanging from the walls on the orangutan side. We watched as several of them swung back and forth with the grace of acrobats. One, in particular, started showing off. I began thinking, maybe orangutans aren't so bad after all. Then it landed directly in front of me, turned, locked eyes, grabbed its, and began peeing on the glass, right in front of me. So you see, I don't just dislike orangutans, they dislike me too. Story 26. In 1995, I was working in a psychiatrist's office. One of our kindest patients was a woman I'll call Sarah Simmons for the sake of this story. Her real name was very distinctive and uncommon. She was smart, funny, and doing well in her treatment. We were close in age, and she had platinum blonde, short, spiky hair, similar to how I'd worn mine back in the 80s. Sarah eventually transitioned out of treatment because she was improving. A few months later, we received word that she had died in a motorcycle accident. I felt genuinely sad. She had been an interesting person, and we'd had a lot in common. Had we met under different circumstances, I could have easily seen us being friends. Fast forward 12 years. A married couple came over to my house for dinner for the first time. We didn't know each other very well yet. This was the start of what later became a long and close friendship. I knew very little about them, other than that they had both come from out of state and settled in D.C. As they were leaving, the husband looked at an old photo of me from college, taken over 20 years earlier. He stared at it for a moment, turned to me with a somewhat nostalgic look and asked, "Do you know Sarah? Sarah Simmons?" I was confused. Yes, I had known someone named Sarah Simmons, but how did he know that? And why was he asking? He pointed at the picture of me. She was my girlfriend for years after law school. She passed away a couple of years after we broke up. It was a complicated relationship and a difficult breakup, but we were becoming friends again when she died. How do you know her? Why do you have her picture? I was stunned. I explained that the photo was actually of me, taken 2 decades ago. I told him that I had known Sarah, though I was vague about how. We were bound by patient confidentiality, even after death. We all stood there in stunned silence. In a metro area of over 3 million people, what were the chances that he'd mistake a photo of me for his late ex-girlfriend, who I also happened to know from a completely different chapter of her life? Story 27. I went to France about 3 years ago, when I was 22, to visit my dad's side of the family. We're Armenian, but that's where his relatives live. His nieces are all in their 40s, and 2 of the 3 are divorced. The first night I got there, they insisted on taking me out to a bar club. They called it a discotheque. So we go, grab seats at the bar, and I immediately realize I'm the youngest person there by at least a decade. The bartender brings our drinks, and as I'm reaching to grab mine, everything suddenly goes black for a split second. I open my eyes and realize I blacked out for half a second. I feel something on my forehead, and as I reach up to touch it, I suddenly feel a huge flow of blood gushing down my face. I'm instantly covered from head to toe. None of my cousins noticed what had happened, so I tapped one on the shoulder. They turned around and nearly had a heart attack. I saw a bloody scotch glass on the floor. Must have been the culprit. I went to the bathroom to clean up. The glass had hit me square in the center of my forehead, yet I never felt the impact. The bar owner came rushing in, panicked, trembling, speaking quickly in French. I looked at my cousin, shrugged, and told him I was fine and didn't need stitches. The man looked like he was about to cry, probably terrified that a tourist had been injured in his bar. Anyway, I cleaned up as best I could. Blood was everywhere. Shirt, pants, shoelaces, socks, even my watch. I walked back out into the bar in my blood-soaked clothes. The funniest part? Some woman had taken my old spot at the bar and didn't notice she was resting her elbows in a pool of blood. I pointed out and she screamed and ran out of the bar. The rest of the night consisted of random French people buying me drinks, toasting the American, cheering, and my last memory is of us flipping over flower and tree pots outside my cousin's ex-husband's restaurant at 4 a.m. Story 28. My father once taught me how to make an explosive using a few common farm materials, probably the kind of thing that would get someone monitored by the authorities. I wasn't paying much attention and got the mix wrong. The first attempt just fizzled. I left it under the stump I was trying to remove, since you don't mess with unexploded devices. Went home, made a new mix, stronger this time. Came back the next day in an old Land Cruiser with a couple of friends. We set up the new charge, ran a cable to a dry creek bed about 30 meters away, and got ready. 3, 2, 1. Boom! The explosion was so loud we immediately ducked, and then watched as the giant stump went flying straight into the air. We ran. A massive crash followed. When we came back, we found the huge stump had landed directly on top of the Land Cruiser, crushing the cab into the dirt. We had to walk all the way home. Ironically, we had initially planned to sit in the vehicle while the detonation happened. I changed my mind at the last second, thinking we might get hit by flying debris. About 10 years later, I visited the site again. The big stump was still there, as was the crushed Land Cruiser and a large crater, all surrounded by perfectly farmed wheat. I think the farmer who owns that land now sees it as a warning. And just to add, I was 5 years old at the time and recovering from getting a toe reattached. Quick backstory: don't run barefoot in places filled with sharp sheet metal. Okay, technically it was 2 toes. Anyway, I climbed into the car parked at the top of our driveway and started messing around. I accidentally released the parking brake. The car rolled down the hill, missed the water tank, the barbecue, the clothesline, the dogs, pretty much everything, except the empty pool. No major harm done, but I bolted. I hid like the Easter bunny running from the kid in Willy Wonka. My dad eventually found me, and he didn't say much. But that didn't stop him from leaving a handprint on my backside that lasted for the rest of primary school. Story 29. I'm from a fairly small, traditional part of the country, and I had traveled to London for a conference. Our hotel was a bit dismal, located on Shaftesbury Avenue. After the conference, we all went out for the evening, had a few drinks, and came back to the hotel relatively early, since we had a 9 a.m. start the next morning. But I was still feeling energized and decided to go back out for a walk and maybe a bit more to drink. Big mistake. I ended up absolutely out of it, and my stomach started feeling a bit strange. I was wandering through Soho when I began talking to a young woman. I couldn't understand much of what she was saying, but she seemed to find me entertaining and stuck around. After a while, this very large man with intense eyes showed up and started trying to convince me to leave, probably annoyed that I was wasting her time. I tried to argue with him, but it was difficult since I was A, struggling to understand him, B, struggling to speak myself, and C, unable to remember anything for more than 10 seconds. As the exchange got more heated, I turned to the young woman for help, only to realize she had disappeared. Now the man was quite angry, and he began threatening me. He kept bending down to smash his bottle on the sidewalk, but it wouldn't break. The third time he tried and failed, I stepped in and attempted to knee him in the face. I missed entirely. We ended up rolling around on the pavement, bouncing off parked cars, fists flying. Somehow I ended up on top of him, delivering a few kicks, not with real force, just enough to get him to back off. He started yelling, "Help! Police!" at the top of his lungs. So I decided it was time to leave and went in search of my hotel. When I say went in search, I really mean waddled. Remember that funny stomach feeling I mentioned? Turns out my body decided to divert all available energy to my muscles during the fight, and I had a bit of an accident. I eventually found the hotel, but the front door was locked, so I had to ring the bell. The poor night desk worker came to the door and was greeted by a sight. Me, shirt torn open like a scene from an old sci-fi episode, blood on my face, and, let's just say, a very unpleasant odor following behind. "Room 403, I announced cheerfully. I made my way to my room, got into the shower, and, well, I handled the rest. Let's just say I pushed it down the drain and leave it at that. I turned up the next morning with a black eye and told everyone I walked into a door. Story 30. I was living in a house with two other friends, and both of them had their girlfriends living with them. My room was in the basement, and they had theirs upstairs. One day I was getting changed when I heard the doorbell ring. I wasn't dressed yet, so I grabbed a towel to answer the door. A little decency goes a long way. I opened the door and found a pizza delivery guy. One of my friends had ordered it. He and his girlfriend had spent most of the day being busy, and that tends to make you hungry. I called up to him while holding onto my towel tightly, doing my best to avoid turning this into one of those stories. My friend came down the stairs, turned the corner, and to my surprise, he was also wearing a towel. So there we were, two 20-year-old guys standing around the house in towels. The pizza guy was clearly trying not to laugh, probably thinking we were a couple. He kept a straight face because he was a professional, but my friend and I weren't. We realized what it looked like and burst out laughing. We immediately started saying, "It's not what it looks like." And the delivery guy gave us that classic, "sure buddy" expression. Then my friend's girlfriend, hearing all the laughter, came down the stairs to see what was going on. And of course, she was also wearing a towel. Now the pizza guy was looking at all three of us standing there in towels like we were part of some European spa scene. My friend and I pointed at her and said, "See? Told you it's not what it looks like. This makes it better, right?" Story 31. It was the first time my parents left for a full week and put me in charge of the house. At the time, our dog was recovering from leg surgery, so she couldn't go up and down the stairs. That meant I had to sleep in the TV room on an air mattress. Naturally, I decided that parents being away meant it was time for a little extra freedom, so I stripped down and crawled into bed, enjoying the no-rules lifestyle. I was also a very neurotic teenager, so I locked the door that led to the garage. About 30 minutes later, I wanted a snack from the small fridge we kept in the garage. I went out there, thinking I had unlocked the door, but I hadn't. There I was, completely naked, locked out of my own house at 10 p.m. My first plan was to find something to wear in the garage and go to the neighbor's house for the spare key, but all I could find was a rain jacket and a towel. It would have been very obvious to my neighbor what had happened, and I wasn't about to face that kind of embarrassment. Meanwhile, my dogs were barking like crazy inside as I tried to get back in. Eventually, I found an old gift card in my car and managed to jimmy the door open. I had to break back into my own house. Story 32. I'm in a show choir at my school, and all of us guys are a pretty close group. We hang out all the time and are constantly doing dumb things. There are plenty of stories, but this one's a favorite. One night, we were driving around, bored, and decided to go to the nearest Walmart for a good old game of hide and seek. Once inside, I bolted for the section with the beanbags, climbed up onto a shelf, and buried myself. Only one beanbag left visible, covering my face. As I sat there, feeling confident in my hiding spot, I thought to myself, I should come up with a ridiculous story just in case I get caught. I mentally rehearsed the whole thing, proud of my creativity. Then it happened. The bag in front of my face was suddenly pulled away, and I found myself staring directly at a very confused woman. Without missing a beat, I put my finger to my lips and whispered, "Shh." I then launched into my story. I told her I was part of a karate dojo from the city and that we had special permission from Walmart to do a stealth training exercise. I told her she couldn't tell anyone because people would ask too many questions and want to join in. "It's for my dojo," I repeated, Please put the bag back and walk away.